Welcome to In Conversation, day 3 of the Budget Debates 2026. Today with me, I have our first presenter for the day, none other than the Honorable Miss Juretha Fernandes, who would have delivered a wonderful speech today on the House. And of course, she had to beat and teach a little bit as she presented. Welcome to In Conversation.
Thank you, and thank you so much.
You started off, of course, dealing with responses and certain things that were spoken of before. But, I want to start out with the highlight for me. And I think something that was necessary to be dealt with in the House, where you address the issue of the Amerindian Affairs Minister, where she talked about, quote unquote, the culture of the people and why their homes are the way they are. And you address that with so much passion. And I love that. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I am very passionate about it because I grew up hearing this over and over. I think it's a way culture is used basically as a means to suppress the economic advancement of Indigenous people in Guyana. They just have this guise that, oh, this is culture. And that's why I said, there's nobody coming to the National Assembly advancing arguments for persons to go back and live in mud huts or loji or anything like that. So why is it that arguments are being advanced at the level of the National Assembly for Indigenous people to be living in a certain way? Now, when it comes to lifestyle choices, that's a different conversation altogether. Because if somebody wants to live a minimalist lifestyle, they should have the freedom to do so. But to try to basically basket the Indigenous issues together and to say, well, oh, they all want to live like that, that is completely misleading. You cannot take an entire group of people and say they are living in this situation because all of these people want to live like that. And I have no doubt that you can single out a few persons that will be very minimalist, and it's not just Indigenous people. Different ethnicities choose to be minimalist. You can go into the most advanced communities and you can see some people deciding that, oh, they don't want to have this type of lifestyle, they want to live.
But that doesn't mean they're struggling.
But that is true also. But when it comes to Guyana, and I pointed it out, I went to none other than the preliminary report of the 2022 census, and I read it into the records of the House, because when you go to the census and you look at that report, you're going to see that Indigenous people account for, when it comes to the household size, Indigenous hinterland communities, rural areas, hinterland communities account for when the most people living together in one household. And it basically tells a story. And that's why I spoke it into the records of the National Assembly today, because I want persons to understand that this is more than just a number. It says to the Guyanese population that there is an issue when it comes to housing in the hinterland. It doesn't necessarily mean that Indigenous people want to be living together in cramped spaces, but when it comes to the economic situation, and nobody can come and bat this argument with me, the economic situation in the hinterland is nothing close to what you see on the coastline. When it comes to cost of living, it's a different story you're hearing there. I do not sit in Georgetown. I do not stay on the coastland and try to make arguments about what is going on in hinterland. I go on the ground myself. I speak to the people. I have messages in my phone from persons saying that this is their situation, they're looking for a betterment. One particular person, and I wanted to mention it, is so the time goes by so quickly, you don't get a chance to actually go into a lot of the things. But there's one particular case that I was faced head on with when I went into Region 9. And there's this young man with his family, and he has a traditional home that he was living in with his family, the same truly leaf roof that, and the whole, where truly leaf roof and all of that come from? Because traditionally, Indigenous people had to basically feed, clothe, house themselves from the land that they were living on. Today, Indigenous people are not feeding, clothing, and housing themselves from the land in which they're living on. So you see, you cannot just try to separate part of this. You have to look at it holistically in order for you to see where we were as a people, where we have been going, and where we intend to go. And this whole argument that persons want to bring down and say, "Oh, this is our culture. We need." No, that's not culture. Culture is something completely different. The government of Guyana budgets for culture.
Yeah.
Culture is budgeted for. And it is not to suppress people into any particular economic situation. And that is what has been happening when it comes to Indigenous communities. And I want to remind persons, I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation the budgets that we had during 2015 to 2020, the largest budget being $300 billion.
Yeah.
$300 billion was our largest budget. And it's important to note that the first set of concrete roads Region 9 ever saw, we built them. We built them, and persons were thankful. We started building houses in the hinterland. And I want to say how far back that went. That went still back in from the days of Barnum. It's important to educate yourself before you come to the National Assembly and make arguments. And currently, you would see the PPP government trying to follow suit in that direction. If you go to Region 9, you would see them trying to build houses as well. They're not building not one single house through the Ministry of Housing with a truly roof. None whatsoever.
Correct.
So you see the PPP comes to the National Assembly and they try to represent something that is far from what they are doing in reality. But I think the more profound argument that I wanted to put down on the paper is the fact that the leaders, the Indigenous leaders in the PPP, their lifestyle does not reflect what they come and advocate for Indigenous people. They are living lavish lifestyles. And then they come to advocate for minimalist living for Indigenous people. And it has to be called out. I think it's hypocritical and we should not allow it to go free. And I wasn't giving it any room in the National Assembly today. I was not about that. I was standing on business and I wanted Indigenous people to know being born as an Indigenous person in Guyana should not subject you to a certain economic situation in this country. You should be able to have the opportunities to have economic advancement like every other ethnic group in this country as well.
Yeah, I think you did a beautiful job at bringing that point over. And I really do believe it was important for it to be said in the House and persons looking on to understand what they're dealing with.
And Shanika, there's some, there's so much more because the first day on Monday, we went through some questions and I asked none other than the Minister of Tourism, Industry and Commerce a question. And I asked specifically about these small business grants and whether or not they're given to Indigenous communities. Number one, the Speaker disallowed my question from appearing on the order paper because of a whole lot of whatever. But the point that I wanted to bring over in those things is that you talk about how far this country is going, the economic advancement of this country. But when it comes to the Indigenous people, you want to make sure that I would say that the people want them to know your place. They want us to know our place altogether. And I heard the Minister of Marine Affairs, she came out, I believe it was on Monday. So she came out after a presentation that she wasn't pleased with. And she said, we're not where we want to be as with everything that needs to be done, but people would say you got to crawl before you walk. And that was her exact words, that you have to crawl before you walk. And I thought to myself, that's the problem we have. We have Indigenous leaders time and time again coming to the National Assembly. Our predecessor, Paul Nsukai, was no different. Coming to the National Assembly and urging Indigenous people that they must be thankful, grateful, and accept the minimal that is given to them through the PPP administration in every budget that they bring to represent Indigenous matters. And I believe that the Indigenous communities need stronger leadership, most definitely, and it doesn't come from the likes of the PPP. The PPP pulls out leaders from the Indigenous community. Those leaders live in a luxurious lifestyle, and they stand at the level of the National Assembly and they advocate for Indigenous people to live lesser lifestyles than they do. And that is hypocritical. I wouldn't have
Very
it.
much so. You in your presentation as well, you talked about, policy and bringing it home.
Yeah.
You go to university, you learn about formulation of policy and
The
implementation.
policy cycle.
Correct. And you hit the government on that because we're seeing it, and I mean other persons as well brought it up in a different way in their presentation, but it is the same thing you're seeing. There is what you said here. There is the formulation and the implementation, but
They don't go to evaluate.
they don't follow through with the implementation process and the evaluation of things to be done. Let's talk about that.
Well, the evaluation is necessary because, I said it before in previous presentations in the National Assembly, I always make the point, and you come to the National Assembly, you have these big announcements, monies are budgeted, monies are thrown at project, but what next? If you do not go and do the follow through, do the evaluation to see if the intended outcome and the intended beneficiaries to these projects are actually ones that are benefiting from it, if the policy actually was implemented in the way in which it should have been, so the outcome is what you wanted it to be. If it is not like that, then you're failing as a government.
Correct.
And I made a point, and I was sticking to the Indigenous numbers because I believe it needs to be highlighted a whole lot more. And when we were in government in 2016, and the pass rate for mathematics in the hinterland communities. I looked at the pass rate for mathematics in Region 1, Region 7, Region 8, Region 9. I compared between 2016 to 2024. That is a time span covered on the Ministry of Education website right now. If anybody's to go to that website, that's what they're going to see. And it's profound, it's damning, it's interesting to say the least when you look at those numbers, because in 2016 our budget was 230 billion. 230 billion. We were delivering pass rates for mathematics in the hinterland. Fast forward to 2024, the PPP, with over $1 trillion budgeted in 2024, started to deliver ridiculously less when it comes to the pass rate in mathematics in those very same regions. So it tells us stories.
You said here.
They moved from 18% in Region 7 to 14%. 18% on the coalition in 2016 to 14% in 2024. In Region 9, they went right down to, I think, to 3%.
7%.
To 7%, to 3% in one region. And that is what, it's important for us to look at it, because I said that no amount of money that you throw at incompetence could cure incompetence. And that's what you see with the PPP. They're too busy grabbing as much as they can grab, advancing their own lives while telling Guyanese citizens that, wait your turn, you can get something later. We're not going to have it. We're not having that. We're not having that at all.
You as well in your presentation, and I think importantly, you went to the census and, you talked about those numbers and what it looks like, and you addressed Region 1 and what's happening there. Let's talk about that.
I went to the census specifically because in the budget book, the Minister of Finance, the minister within the office of the president with responsibility for finance, Ashton Singh would stand in National Assembly. He would speak for over 6 hours and he would give that budget presentation, and everybody is listening and all of that. And then he closes off the presentation and they go take the photos, they knock glasses and all of that. But in that very document here, which you call the budget speech itself, if you look at the back, there's some appendix. And those information there, the data, the fine print, I like to say, and they print it very fine. So you got to go through it with a fine tooth comb. If you were to go into things like the socio-economic indicators, it tells a story. It tells a story whether or not the government is being effective and whether or not whatever monies that are being spent, the resources that are being injected into the country, into the various sectors, if it is actually getting the outcome that it should be getting, if the people of the country actually benefiting. And when you go into those numbers, you will see things like malnutrition rate went up, trillions of dollars spent. How is it that more persons, more children are malnourished? That doesn't make any sense. There are certain numbers there that tells a story. I thought that the population rate was very interesting. The population rate it's skyrocketing in the last 3 years. And you go to the birth rate, and the birth rate is declining. Steadily declining, sharp decline over the last year. So you say, what is accounting for this population? The people would go and say, oh, more persons are coming back home. But then you go to their very document, which is the preliminary report of the 2022 census. And that report says basically that the PPP cannot account for the undocumented Venezuelans in Guyana. They stated that in no uncertain terms. Over 30,000 persons unaccounted for, undocumented people unaccounted for, at the very least. So basically, we're living in a country in which the government is spending trillions of dollars. We have porous borders. We are living in a country in which we don't know who is in this country with us right now. And the government seems very comfortable with that. So it's important to go into those documents to actually interpret the data that is being presented, because they try to do all sorts of things. They don't like to bring those documents to the front.
Yeah, and you mentioned it there. Imagine 30,000
at minimum
documented, and you're saying to us that our birth rate is decreasing.
Yep.
At the same time. Now, I can't remember you using, smaller terms to describe the budget. So I want you to generally describe the budget. And then if you can give me 3 words that you think describes this 2026 budget that has been presented to the nation.
Well, I believe the PPP's budget, they have a pattern. And I would like to say that they don't fail to deviate from their pattern when it comes to the budget presentation, the formulation of their budgets altogether. And that pattern has been over the years that they fail to budget for the most vulnerable in society. They fail to bring a budget that is equitable to Guyanese, because they look at persons that need more and they neglect to actually give more to them so that they can be brought up and so that you can close that gap. We always talk about that, close that gap. So that is how I describe the PPP budget, a budget that lacks the interest and lacks the compassion to actually take into consideration the most vulnerable in society, to budget for them in an equitable manner. I believe that every budget that we've looked at so far, you can see the same thing. The PPP would stand in the National Assembly and they would proudly talk about the number of cars being registered in Guyana. But they're not taking into account that 58% of the country was recorded as being in poverty. 58% of the country cannot go out there, and they're the least interested in buying a car, because their interest is making sure that they have a meal to give to their children.
Correct.
At the end of the day. And that tells a different story, and as we talk about it, we have the actual Guyana Labor Force survey report for the 4th quarter in 2024, and I think they just pushed this out probably a day, if not last night. Because I look for this. I mean, I comb the ministry. I comb the ministry's page, like if it's my very own. The birth statistics, I'm on that website so much. I monitor it like it's my own. So as soon as this document comes out, I see them right away. You hear persons talking about unemployment, for example, and it's covered in this document here. You hear them talk about unemployment. This is something I didn't get to touch on in my presentation today. I really, really wanted to touch on it. But I saw a lot of numbers being thrown at us. A lot of numbers being thrown at us when it comes to the size of the budget, how much money is being injected into certain things. I woke up this morning and I saw an article on DPI that's talking about the unemployment rate being slashed in half. And persons always say when it comes to the PPP, the devil is in the details. When you come, believe it or not, when you come to those labor force survey that they presented us with, they're saying that the unemployment rate was almost slashed in half. They're reporting the unemployment rate at, let me just get the direct figure for you guys. You know, I like to deal with the numbers because the numbers don't lie, as persons say. They're saying unemployment's at 6.8%. But when you come to their figures and their graph, and personally, I always encourage persons, you know, go to the Bureau of Statistics website, download these documents for yourself, go through it. You would say that, you will see that they're saying for persons that are temporarily employed, 14.3%. Persons that are permanently employed, it's 55.6%. And then they say 30.2% of persons are unknown. So they don't know how they're employed. They don't know if they're permanent. They don't know if they're temporary.
They don't know nothing.
They just know they're employed. And it begs the question: if this is the standard of reporting that is employed when compiling these documents, it leaves much to be desired. Because I can tell you, it basically says if you go and give somebody a little raise to do a task for you on the road, they're probably counting them as employed. But most importantly, you would have heard over the years, they came to the National Assembly and they talked about these part-time workers, these CSOs, 10-day workers and so. And I want to tell persons that when we look at all of those, you know, the policing groups, the CSOs, the 10-day workers, those categories of workers, they all get paid the same amount of money. They were getting $40,000 every month. 23,000 persons getting $40,000 every month. They say now that they're going to raise it to $50,000 per month. I want to remind persons that the minimum wage in this country is half of the minimum wage in this country, basically. Those persons, those 23,000 persons were added into the employment figure. So you understand what the PPP does? They add 23,000 persons into this figure, and then it comes, we slash unemployment. But are those persons really employed? Can they benefit from a bank loan? Can they go into the bank saying that they're a 10-day worker and they would like to get a mortgage for a home? They cannot.
Will they gain NIS later on?
All of those things. So that is the way in which the PPP operates. And you know, there's so much when it comes to the rural unemployment. You know, it is so crazy. I beg persons at all times, never ever take the PPP at face value. When the PPP says something to you, you research it yourself. When I was speaking, they could not rebut what I was saying because I was giving them the data presented by government agencies. They would not go present these data to the public, but I would, because this is my responsibility, and that's why we're here in the National Assembly, to make sure that we hold government accountable. The rural unemployment makes up the bulk of the unemployment figure. These are the real numbers. So, you know, all this fluff and bluff with the Indigenous representatives on the PPP side of the house, they need to get down and work to make sure that the persons living in those communities are represented and represented well, because they deserve a good life too. The same way in which their representatives in the National Assembly are living well, the people on the ground deserve to live well also.
Thank you. So, give us the budget in 3 words.
I think it's unsatisfactory. It's impossible for me to put it in 3 words. You know, it's impossible for me to put it in 3 words, no matter how I try, because I don't want to be generic in what I say. I want to be very clinical in how I make my assessment. And my assessment is that the budget does not cater for the vulnerable society, and the budget does not take into account equitable distribution of resources. And those 2 things are fundamental when you're looking at a country in which over more than 50% of its population is living in poverty. So the budget is found wanting when it comes to actually catering to the vulnerable persons living in this country.
Thank you so much,
It's like probably
MP.
300 words.
It's okay. It's okay. Thank you so much for your presentation, of course, this interview. And to our viewing public, stay tuned. We'll be interviewing Honorable Ganesh Maipal in a few, and then we will be waiting on the presentation of Dr. David Hines, who will be on the floor shortly. And of course, after that, we will interview him. So stay tuned as we keep you updated on day 3 of Budget 2026 debates.